You want to know what radicalized me? Okay, I'll tell you. So in high school, I was planning on joining the Marine Corps. I know that does not look like my look, but at the time I was gung-ho. I had a chip on my shoulder and I had something to prove, and I thought if I completed one of the hardest military trainings in the world, then maybe I would be worthy of affection. I am well aware that that's dumb. Anyway, so before I signed the paperwork, I had a couple older buddies of mine who had just got back from Afghanistan. And I was like, hey guys, how did that go? You know, I might be joining you in a few years. They were like, do not do that. Do not do that. Of course, I asked them why, and they said, the entire time we were there, we were guarding oil wells. And I said, okay, guarding oil wells, that's a precious resource, I understand. You'll need those resources to get the country back up and running again, right? No, they were guarding it for American oil companies. They got attacked, they got mortared. They did this every day so that American oil companies could come in and take the oil for free and profit off of it. And they lost buddies guarding that well too. So that was the beginning of me asking questions about what the truth is and what we're told the truth is about things that go on around the world. I was about to sign my life away to go fight for freedom when actually it was to fight for American oil companies. A 20-year conflict, tens of thousands of casualties. On the American side, the other side, millions are gone for one reason: profit margins. And the more I started reading about human history, the more I learned that we've been lied to about just about everything. Vietnam War started over a lie. Korean War started over a lie. The war in the Middle East, all of that was a lie. War has always been and always will be a racket where old bitter men convince young men to give their lives up for God, glory, or whatever, when in reality, it's to put power in the hands of the people who are already powerful at the cost of our young people. And to be honest with you, I don't think I'm that radical. I think my response to the world around me is a reasonable one. I think it's reasonable to dislike a system that oppresses all of mankind and hurts millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions over the course of decades, and they don't care. I feel like I'm reasonable. I don't feel like I'm radical. I don't think it's a radical belief to think no one should go hungry, or no one should go without health care, or no one should go without clean drinking water. Like, what kind of world do we live in where it convinces us that those things are bad? That if you think that those things should be a reality, that you're a crazy person, that you're a radical. No, I think I'm perfectly reasonable. And I'm confused as to how anyone else can be anything other than that. How can you believe that people shouldn't have clean water? You shouldn't have food. That it's okay that 25,000 people starve every day. That you think that's okay? I'm a radical? I think they're radical. Anyway, there's my rant for the day. I appreciate your faces. Toodles.
Today I want to talk to you about 3 wars: the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, and the Afghanistan War. Let's get started. During the Vietnam War, the United States of America spent approximately $168 billion, which is equivalent to around $1 trillion today. Fun fact about the Vietnam War, you can call it a fun fact, was that our annual defense budget actually peaked during this time at approximately $70 billion every year, which equals around $500 billion today. Which I will just slide in here and say that in 2023 we spent $820 billion on our defense budget, so still less than today, but you know. In the Vietnam War, companies like Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and Raytheon profited significantly. You cannot find actual amounts because back then the reporting was a little bit different, but they made lots of money from selling weapons and contracts. A classified report was commissioned by the Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara in 1967 to document the United States' political and military involvement in the Vietnam War during 1945 to 1967. This report was later known as the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers exposed that United States officials knew that the Vietnam War was unwinnable, yet we continued to escalate our involvement anyways in order to avoid political embarrassment. They also showed the United States was not involved in the Vietnam War to fight for democracy or fight off communism, but instead to avoid a perceived loss of credibility. Lastly, the Pentagon Papers exposed that our president and our officials were lying to the American people about the war's progress while only privately acknowledging their serious doubts and setbacks. In 1971, Daniel Ellsberg published the Pentagon Papers in the New York Times, which literally caused the Nixon administration to take the New York Times to the Supreme Court because they were trying to argue that the Pentagon Papers being in the newspapers and to the press was causing national security threats and concerns. Luckily, the Supreme Court at that time at least had some sense in their brains, and they said, hello, freedom of the press, who? You cannot censor this information from the American people. And the impact from this case actually was that governments couldn't restrain information from coming out to the American public without actually justifying that it's actually a security threat. You know what I mean? The Afghanistan war lasted from 2001 until 2021, and the United States of America spent approximately $2 trillion on it. Many defense contractors were involved and profited heavily off the Afghanistan war. Also, if any of these look weird, I had to write these all backwards. Are you impressed? Are you impressed? To give more specific numbers, Lockheed Martin was making around $40 to $50 billion annually during the war in Afghanistan, and Boeing, over the course of 20 years, made over $100 billion from defense contracts selling weapons. Speaking of Lockheed Martin and Boeing, it's also interesting because annually Lockheed Martin spends around $10 to $15 million on lobbying our United States government, and Boeing spends approximately $15 to $20 million annually bribing our United States government. I'll make another video talking about why that matters later, but moving on. Similar to how the Pentagon Papers exposed what was actually going on during the Vietnam War, we luckily received the Afghanistan Papers in 2019 to do just the same thing. In 2019, the Washington Post, through the Freedom of Information Act, requested a collection of interviews and documents that had been collected over the course of the war in Afghanistan. The Afghanistan Papers, again, exposed the United States officials for lying to the American people about the progress of the war in Afghanistan. They were presenting this optimistic picture while only privately acknowledging the mission's failings. Papers also exposed that officials felt like there needed to be clearer objectives and strategy, and that they felt like the prolonged nature of the war in Afghanistan was due to not having these things. Papers also discussed the rampant corruption, waste, and the ineffective use of resources during the war in Afghanistan. Lastly, the Afghanistan Papers showed that what the officials were saying to the public was completely different from what they were saying behind the scenes, with, again, their overly optimistic approach when they were actually lying about what was going on. And lastly, we have the Iraq War, which costed the United States of America approximately $1.9 trillion. In February of 2003, Secretary of State Colin Powell presented evidence to the United Nations that Iraq had active weapons of mass destruction programs going on, which is what started the Iraq War. Big surprise, here are the companies that were profiting off of the war in Iraq. Hard to get the exact estimate of how much money they were profiting specifically because, one, the war in Afghanistan was also happening during this time, and two, the specific contracts for the war in Iraq are not public. However, again, we have our two big here, Lockheed Martin and Boeing, making about 40 to 50 billion. Oh, I didn't write the 5 backwards. Annually, and Boeing was making around $32 billion annually during the war in Iraq. It later came out that the reports from the various intelligence agencies, including the CIA, were either exaggerated or misinterpreted to fit this narrative of Iraq being an imminent threat in their weapons of mass destruction program. We also have a British document from 2002 that indicated the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy in order to justify the invasion into Iraq. There you have it, the beginning of the rabbit hole. The Vietnam War, the Afghanistan War, and the Iraq War. 3 wars that we lied about, right? 3 wars that defense contracting and weapon manufacturing companies profited heavily on. 3 wars that, in my opinion, the United States of America was exposed for its true colors and its true reasonings for wanting to be the police of the world. And it had absolutely nothing to do with our safety. Tune in next time because I actually really want to talk more about weapon manufacturing companies, how they lobby, the impacts of their lobbying, different bills and acts that they've gotten passed, so on and so forth. So stay tuned for next time.
Truly amazing the amount of murder and mayhem that the United States is responsible for in the Middle East. Truly amazing. Virtually no successes and nothing but failures. And failures where huge numbers of people die. Countries are physically wrecked. Afghanistan, now the longest war in American history. I know not a single national security analyst who thinks there's any possibility we can win that war. And all we're doing is kicking the can down the road now. so that Obama doesn't get blamed for losing Afghanistan, and now Trump doesn't get blamed for losing Afghanistan. Iraq, we wrecked that country. Syria, where the United States has played a very important role in trying to topple Assad that's hardly ever reported in the media. That's a total disaster. The amount of murder and mayhem we've created in Syria. And Libya, we did a great job there, right? With the help of the Europeans. My God, right? The Bush Doctrine in the greater Middle East, an abject failure.
Stand before war.
We are not humans. We do not have feelings. We have nothing. I want to become a good doctor in the future, but my dreams remain dreams.
Whenever we go out, we have to go out with a man.
Afghans, women today is not the same as they were 20 years ago.
Can you imagine? We can't talk outside. We even can't talk loudly inside our home. Because if our neighbors hear our voices, it's a very big sin.
Today, Afghanistan is the only country on the planet Earth where women and girls are banned from education right. We women are being punished and imprisoned only because of our gender.
I'm an Afghan girl who's a victim of Taliban's government. After the ban, everything changed.
I am house arrest. My husband was killed by Taliban. In Afghanistan, Cold War is continue. Please save Afghan women.
Can your minds really accept all these things? Can you really imagine yourselves in this situation? Between these rules, between these people?
All right, so now I want to change gears a little bit. And I want to do another one of these stories. And what I want to do is I want to actually start with an event, a catastrophic event, an emotionally catastrophic event, but also an actual damaging event, and it's 9/11. So 9/11 happens. I don't want to go into the details, but obviously 4 planes are hijacked. One of them goes into the Pentagon, one goes into each of the Twin Towers, and it's done by 19 Muslims, and those Muslims were, of course, working for Al-Qaeda, and their goal in this terrorist attack was to hurt us. And they did. They hurt us. There's no two ways about it. Mostly emotionally, but also financially a little bit, and the loss of 3,000 lives. What happens next is what I want to focus on, not the actual event. Because I think most of us will probably happily agree this is a catastrophic event. It was a painful event, an emotional event, right? It was the wrong thing to do. Terrorism sucks. If anybody has a problem with those statements, we can have a conversation about that later. But let's just leave it there for now. The interesting thing for me, though, is what do you do in the aftermath of this? So here we have this president who, while the event was happening, got in the air and began flying in circles. Why? Because he feared that he was the target. Okay. But what did we need in that moment? And the first thing that we needed was we needed to see the president, and we needed a little bit of reassurance. What he needed to do is what Eisenhower would have done, or Truman would have done, or Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have done. What he needed to do was get up in front of the White House while the event was happening and do a press conference while the event was happening and tell us what was happening in detail and talk us through it. Instead, we were president-free for a while, which was actually turned out a blessing because it was George Bush Jr. You know what I mean? Like he would have said something really dumb. How do I know? Because that's what he did. Like one of my favorite George Bush Jr. quotes are, "Our enemy are clever, see? So are we. They're constantly thinking of new ways to harm America. And so are we." You're like, are you admitting this? You're admitting this publicly? I thought this was supposed to be a secret between you and Dick Cheney. By the way, Donald Rumsfeld is standing right next to him while he does it, and Donald Rumsfeld is like looking around like, is there an exit in the area? He looks so uncomfortable. And of course, George doesn't know what he's saying. Poor guy, he probably doesn't know what planet he's on. So here's this moment he loses. Right, you just think of FDR and the fireside chats, or Winston Churchill talking about fear, and here's this gutless coward hiding in the air. It's amazing. Talk about failure of leadership. And then he finally does talk to us. What does he say? The American economy is collapsing. I need you to go out and shop. Go buy a car. He actually told us to go buy a car. So we're all mourning, and his solution to everything is, wouldn't it be great if you had a brand new Honda in your driveway? No, that's not what I want to hear from you. The economy is dying? First of all, I'm baffled. Why? Why is the economy dying? 3,000 people died, yeah, that sucks, but there's 300 million of us. So why is the economy dying? 2 buildings got knocked down, yeah, that sucks. Why is the economy dying? This is the United States of America. We're the richest country on earth. There's nothing that should be damaging the economy. Well, because the airplanes couldn't fly for a week, right? Because you don't know this, but there were no airplanes flying. It was really weird. You look in the sky and there was no contrails anywhere. And I swear, everything got quieter. There was like this moment of time, it lasted like 2 weeks, where we were really nice to each other. People were like walking around going, hey, no, after you. And then, no road rage. People are letting each other drive out. You wanted to come in front of me? Yeah, come. It was amazing. It was really weird. It's like we had become humans for 2 weeks. And then we went and bought that brand new Honda. We had to bail out the airline industry. Now the airline industry, it turned out, lied to us. There was nothing that 9/11 really did to them that hurt them. Yeah, for a week they couldn't fly, but so what? What really hurt them was they had a terrible economic model, and then they used 9/11 as an excuse, and they lied to us, and they said that they were in trouble. So we had to bail them out. So we did. Southwest Airlines never got in trouble. Why? Because they had a fantastic business model. If 9/11 was so catastrophic, why wasn't Southwest Airlines in trouble? And that's the end of that. So, George Bush Jr. immediately starts talking about revenge. Not, let's reflect. Not, let's take a moment to figure out what just happened. It's, somebody needs to die. But we have a problem, because the 19 people we want to kill are already dead. That's tough. That's a tough one to overcome, because then who do you kill? Well, obviously Osama bin Laden needs to die, but that's a problem too, because you got to remember the bin Laden family and the Bush family were interconnected. Osama bin Laden's dad is the chief architect in Saudi Arabia. He bailed out George Bush Jr. when George Bush Jr. bankrupted his oil company, Arbusto. So what does that telephone call go like? Hey, remember me, I'm George, I'm the president. I'm gonna try and kill your son. Is that okay? You helped me out a few years back, I really appreciate it, but yeah, I'm coming after your son. And so what are we gonna do? We're gonna invade Afghanistan. Well, that's fascinating to me, because what did Afghanistan have to do with anything? You go, well, Osama bin Laden was there. Okay, so let's do a brain exercise, just a thought experiment. Let's say I commit a terrorist attack in Moscow, but First, I moved to Germany. So I'm living in Hamburg, Germany. I go to Moscow. I commit a terrorist attack. Should Russia attack Germany, or should Russia attack Texas? In this scenario, you're saying they should attack Germany, right? Because Osama bin Laden wasn't from Afghanistan. He was from Saudi Arabia. In fact, Al-Qaeda, hardly any of them were Afghans. They were mostly Egyptians and Saudis and Arabs from, they weren't just Arabs, there were Pakistanis in it. Like it was a mix of, it was international fighters dedicated to fighting the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. And they were our friends. They were our allies that we were funding and training. Osama bin Laden was our friend. Al-Qaeda was one of the forces fighting alongside the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen was funded and trained by the CIA. Charlie Wilson, the Texas representative, that was his idea. He pushed this through and got us involved in the Afghan war as a proxy war against the Soviet Union. Why? Because we wanted vengeance for what they did to us in Vietnam. Isn't that cool? And so, organizations like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were born out of this thing. The idea behind Al-Qaeda was it was going to bring in all these foreign volunteers from the Muslim world to Afghanistan to fight the Russians alongside us and our allies. We weren't directly fighting, but obviously CIA operations. So, we're going to get vengeance by invading Afghanistan. But here's the twist. I don't think you should attack either Germany or Texas. It was a group of individuals who did this, not an entire country. Since when is collective punishment okay? You know what I'm saying? I mean, isn't collective punishment the argument the Nazis kept using? Well, we're going to go ahead and invade Poland. Now, in the case of Poland, it was a trumped-up event. They got some prisoners, they put them in Polish uniforms, and they shot them. And then they said Polish soldiers had invaded Germany. But then it's justified to do a collective punishment event because a group of rogue Poles attacked you? It wasn't like the Polish army crossed the border. This is nonsensical. Now you go, well, but we need Osama bin Laden. Okay, why not do a special forces operation and go find him? Why not have your CIA operatives hunt him down? I mean, we can kill presidents. Surely we can find a guy hiding in caves. Well, turns out in Pakistan, wasn't actually in Afghanistan. We were looking for him in the wrong country. Just hanging out with his family, watching TV, totally retired, thinking, wow, they're still looking for me in Afghanistan. Wonder when they're going to figure out I'm not there. 10 years it took us to figure it out. 10 years. That's failed intel. So, okay, we're going to do a vengeance war. Where? I know it's Afghanistan, but what's its nickname? Graveyard of Empires. You're going to attack that place? The British Empire. When I say it, you think, oh, yeah, they were amazing. They conquered India. I mean, right there, you don't even need to know about Canada and Egypt and South Africa. Just to God, India is mind-blowing. This itty-bitty little island where they fry their tomatoes and boil their steak. Conquered India. It's like out of a sci-fi movie. It should be impossible. The last time I said this in a lecture, I invoked Eddie Izzard, and I forgot his name in the lecture, so I'm giving him credit for a previous lecture where I invoked Eddie Izzard. So, Jeremy reminded me it was Eddie Izzard. I love Eddie Izzard, so I'm sorry I accidentally stole your material without crediting you. He's changed me, Eddie Izzard has. If you don't know what I'm talking about, YouTube later, Eddie Izzard. Some of you are going to hate my guts for all eternity after that, but the rest of you will understand. It's okay. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with you hating me. So, we're going to attack a country that the British attacked 3 times already when they were the greatest empire on the planet at the time. And they were defeated 3 times already. And then the Soviet Union attacked Afghanistan, and they too were defeated. And now we're going to go in again, but this time it's a NATO operation because we've invoked Article 5. Article 5 says, if one NATO state is attacked, all NATO states are automatically at war. We were just attacked. Now, we weren't attacked by Afghanistan. In fact, the first thing out of the Taliban's mouth is, hey, whoa, we're ready to help you hunt down Osama bin Laden. That guy's rogue. I can't believe he attacked you like that. And our response was, no, we're coming after you. And they're like, wait a minute, what? You're going to do what? Why are you doing this? Are you sure you want to do this? This is Afghanistan. This could turn out ugly for you. You'll see. But no, we did it anyway because we thought collective punishment. Even though not a single one of the 19 hijackers was from Afghanistan. Even though Osama bin Laden wasn't from Afghanistan. To make matters worse, it was a foreign policy catastrophe because we had Iran help us, and then George Bush Jr. in January of 2002 says that Iran is part of an axis of evil, and any attempt that we had made to normalize relations with with Iran got thrown out the window as we're conducting operations in Afghanistan using Iran's help. The irony is when we fight ISIL in Iraq, in 2014, we're fighting alongside Iranian soldiers in Iraq. So it's just 2 times we've been on the same side in a war with Iranians, and we just can't get past how bitter we are about 1979. And then, in 2002, while we're in this war in Afghanistan, reacting in this really crazy over-the-top way, trying to pin down a country that looks like it can't be conquered, the Bush administration starts talking about Iraq. And people like me are freaking out because everybody knows Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And the Bush administration is saying, yeah, but they have weapons of mass destruction. So for the record, I own a firearm. So you need to come right now and shoot me because there's a distinct possibility at some point down the road I might shoot you. That's the logic. Even if Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, you're saying you have to go to war to get rid of them because you're worried they're going to attack you at some point. But here's the twist. We knew they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. This wasn't like we thought they did, we got there and went, oh, oops. It was, we knew they didn't, this was a lie from the beginning. Had nothing to do with anything. How did we know? Scott Ritter, the UN weapons inspector, had basically given Iraq the clean bill of health. He had identified 98% of the serial numbers on the VX, sarin gas, mustard gas rockets that we had given them. That's how we knew what the serial numbers were. 98%, who cares about the remaining 2% at that point? Especially since the last time Iraq had used those weapons was in the Iran-Iraq war. And so here we were in this weird situation where all of a sudden we're talking about going to war with Iraq. So backtrack just a little bit, because you need to know a piece of information. So the 2000 election was botched. The reason the 2000 election was botched was in November 2000, while the election results are coming in, Florida got put into the Gore column. And then, as the night went on, it got put back into the neutral column. And then, sometime in the morning on Wednesday, it got put into the Bush column. Now, that can happen. The news agencies made a mistake, and they shouldn't have called Florida when they did. That's a possibility. There's no 2 ways about it. The reason the news agencies called Florida the way they did was because of exit polls. So exit polls are, you've voted, you're walking out of the voting booth, you're now in that zone, right? There's that zone where nobody can talk to you about politics. You walk past that zone, there's a sign there. It says, right, no more politics past this point. You walk past that sign and there's a grad student. They're skinny because they live on top ramen, and they've got a pencil and paper, and they're like, can I ask you a question? The reason they stopped you is because they have to count to 7. So they're like, oh, you, okay. And then they go, can you answer a question? Half the people will say, go to hell. And the other half the people will be like, I can't wait to answer. And then they ask you questions like, whom did you vote for? And then maybe some demographic information. And then you carry on in your way. And then they come back and they report this. And when they report this, they're crazy reliable. It is very, 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 very rare that exit polls are wrong. And so we've come to rely on exit polls because it's a fast way to figure out how a state voted. And then we can go from there. The problem was, there was this guy, Greg Palast. He was a journalist. They're so obnoxious. And what he was doing was he was recording all the irregularities in the Florida election and then trying to report them before Gore surrendered, because Gore refused to surrender because there were so many irregularities in Florida, he wanted a recount. He went to the Florida Supreme Court. The Florida Supreme Court overwhelmingly voted he had the right to a recount. George Bush Jr., because he's about states' rights, appealed the ruling to the United States Supreme Court. Anyway, that seems like a contradiction. And the United States Supreme Court, in a totally partisan way, 5 conservatives versus 4 liberals, said the following thing. Gore had asked for 3 counties to be recounted, not the whole state. The Supreme Court said it'll take too long. Besides, who would pay for it? And then they said, and it's not fair you recount 3 counties, you should do the whole state. By the way, that part I totally agree with. Who will pay for it? I have an idea. Why don't you make the Bush and Gore campaigns pay for it? They want to be president so bad. They've got coffers. They're sitting on top of money from donors. Make them pay for it. Or, here's an idea. Why doesn't the United States of America pay for it? I mean, isn't it important that we get our elections right? And why don't we recount the whole state? The Supreme Court can literally do anything in a ruling. They could completely ignore the case that was before them and rule on some random other thing, as we just found out this summer in June about 6 times. So why didn't they just rule, we're mandating that you recount the whole state and then tell us who is going to pay for it, instead of asking us questions like there's Socrates or something, trying to figure out some philosophical problem. In the meantime, Greg Palast shows us all these crazy things that have happened in Florida, and it looks like there was a lot of over-the-top, good old-fashioned Southern vote interference and vote irregularity. And so now George Bush Jr. has won the presidency with a 500,000 vote deficit. He wins the Electoral College, but lost the popular vote. And the Democrats as a whole don't believe he legitimately won Florida because of the signs of cheating. So when Gore finally does surrender in December, a month late, he finally says, okay, Supreme Court has ruled, Gore v. Bush, I finished, I quit. He gets up in front of the country and he tells everybody, please don't riot. No protests. For God's sakes, don't attack the United States Capitol. We're going to have a peaceful transition because no matter what, even if the election is messed up, what is more important than that is that we have the peaceful transition of government so that the democracy stays intact. And we didn't protest. We listened to Gore. It was crazy because there were a lot of angry folk that had felt like the election had been stolen. And for the record, the evidence points to, at least in Florida, the election was stolen. In part because they did eventually do a recount. And in the recount, Gore won. If they had just recounted the state, Gore won. So I think it was like 2 years ago, Gore was he was being interviewed by somebody. I think it's one of those late night sitcom, not sitcom, comedy, I don't even know, I don't pay enough attention. And they asked him, you know, what would have happened if you had won the 2000 election? And Gore said, I did win the 2000 election. Because he did. It turns out. How embarrassingly wonky is that? Gore surrenders. I turned to my wife and I said, George Bush Jr. will attack Iraq right now. She goes, what? Where did this come from? And I go, he's an illegitimate president. Everybody knows it. He has to make himself legitimate. The only way to make yourself legitimate in this moment is start a war. There's nobody in worse shape than Iraq. Because by that point, we had imposed catastrophic, brutal, cruel, inhumane crimes against humanity sanctions on Iraq. Sanctions that that made what we did to apartheid South Africa look like a joke. We cut off their food. We never cut off South Africa's food. We cut off their medicine. Who cuts off the medicine? We were going to grind Iraq into the dirt. And we're going to do it by literally strangling them and starving them. Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State for Bill Clinton. This is before she becomes Secretary of State. She was already in the Bill Clinton administration. She's interviewed by 60 Minutes. There are like 4 years, I think it was, I want to say it was 96. Don't quote me on the year, it might have been 95. I recently wrote something about this and I can't remember the year. She's being interviewed on 60 Minutes, and I think it was Leslie Stahl. Leslie Stahl says, according to the UN, 800,000 Iraqis have already died because of the sanctions. So the sanctions have already been in effect for 5 years. 800,000. It's more than 100,000 a year. And then Leslie Stahl says, and according to the UN, 500,000 are age 5 and under. We'd literally killed 500,000 babies already. Why? Because they invaded Kuwait? What were we gaining from putting these sanctions, these cruel, sadistic sanctions on Iraq? You're trying to get rid of Saddam Hussein by starving people to death? What are you doing? You're crippling the economy? How's that going to get rid of a tyrant? That makes the tyrant stronger. People are going to rally around the tyrant because now they're thinking, well, now we have to fight for this guy because you're killing us. Now we want vengeance. Now we have to defend the state against this foreign force that's doing this thing. And so Leslie Stahl goes, is it worth it? And Madeleine Albright goes, I wouldn't do it differently if I had to do it over again. It's ruthless. Instead of saying, yeah, this is clearly a big mistake. So, by the time we get to 2000, Iraq is ruined economically. Its people are dying of diseases that are curable because they don't have any medicine, and they're starving to death, literally starving to death. And so that was the perfect place to attack, especially because I figured he would lie about the weapons of mass destruction. Because we were already lying about the weapons of mass destruction. So why not keep the lie going? So he didn't. His initial thing to do was to go after the People's Republic of China. He starts flying spy planes into Chinese-claimed airspace. By international law, nobody recognizes China's claim. They go way too far out into the water, and they're in international waters. And so what we do is we'd fly our airplanes into the international waters. We're on the right side. There's no two ways about it. China's claim is ridiculous. But we're also poking China in the eyeballs, so they responded. And they sent aircraft to intercept our aircraft. And they kept doing this, and they were playing chicken with our aircraft. They weren't just flying up and then flying next to, they were doing things like flying past the tail really close and buzzing the wing really close. And on one particular occasion, I remember thinking, he's an idiot. He's going to start a war with China? What's wrong with this guy? And on one occasion, a Chinese aircraft hit the tail of one of our spy planes, causing pretty catastrophic damage to our spy plane. The Chinese aircraft goes in the water, the pilot dies. Our airplane is now forced to do an emergency landing. The nearest runway is in the People's Republic of China. And so we have to land one of our spy planes in the PRC. Talk about embarrassing. Oh. So then he backed off of China. And I was like, phew, phew. Wow, that was close. And then 9/11 happened. And I was like, wow, Osama bin Laden must be on George Bush Jr.'s side. He just handed him the best gift ever, because now he'll rally the people. He has his war. He doesn't need to make up at a war. He's got his war. It was just given to him. And then in October, right, 9/11 being September, in October they published the results showing that George Bush had lost Florida. Timing is everything. We get the vote, the Congress votes to authorize the president to attack Iraq, even though they should definitely stop this. And then there's mass demonstrations, global level mass demonstrations, like the world has never seen. Never, not even in the 60s. On February 15, I'm double checking my year, I think so. That's the year I have in my head. The day I have in my head. It's 2003, February 15. If I remember correctly, it was 15 million protesters on the same day around the world. There's like 2.5 million in Berlin, 2 million in Rome, like 1.5 million in London. There's 500,000 in New York, 500,000 in San Francisco. All on the same day. The world had never seen anything like it before. To protest a war that hadn't happened yet. We attack Iraq on Iranian New Year's. I thought that'd be cool. So we attack them. It was March 21st here, but it's March 22nd there, the moment we attack. And we go to war against Iraq, a country that had never attacked us, never had the means to attack us, never tried to attack us. Isn't that weird? That had been our ally in the 80s. And it was just completely random. And it was brutal. According to Johns Hopkins, we killed 1.3 to 2 million Iraqis from 2003 to 2011 in an 8-year span of time. For a country that never attacked us, never had the means to attack us. Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder called up George Bush Jr. and said, please don't do this. Germany did this. Poland, September 1st, 1939. Don't be like us. You're the United States of America. You're supposed to be the good guy. We've hinged everything we do in Europe on you're the good guy. NATO is based on you're the good guy. We did it anyway. In fact, George Bush Jr. refused to talk to Gerhard Schroeder again until Gerhard Schroeder was replaced in an election by Angela Merkel. We just basically cut off ties with the Federal Republic of Germany, our most important ally. You're like, no, isn't it UK? Germany has the second largest NATO military. It's Germany. Germany is the locomotive for the European Union, right? Germany is the heart center. Spoiler alert on this, there's no such thing as the euro. It's a made-up currency. There's the German mark. Germany has given Europe the German mark, but to make it feel like it's everybody, they called it the euro. Just so we're clear. Right? And Belgium called us up. France called us up. And he said, please don't do this. You don't need to do this. Why are you doing this? And we did it anyway. In the middle of all of this, though, something else is going on. And that other thing is maybe even more important for the purposes of this talk than what I've been talking about up until now. But I needed to make sure I had the background laid out properly so you can set this. There are a group of people in the United States who just can't comprehend 9/11. They can't put it into their heads. It's caused madness for them. And they're trying to figure this out. At one point, somebody decides there's a laser cannon in outer space, and it shot the World Trade Center from space. Another conspiracy is a missile was launched into the Pentagon because there's no remnants of the plane to be seen anywhere. Plane going that fast, hitting a solid structure like the Pentagon, I wouldn't expect to see much left of the plane. The plane is aluminum. You know what I mean? It's aluminum and plastic. When you get in an airplane, it's like flying in a toothpaste tube. You know that, right? Except the wings are filled with aviation fuel. It's a toothpaste tube with explosive wings. That's how you need to think about it. I love flying. This is not me attacking flying. I just want to have a realistic expectation for what you're experiencing. There's a hatchet-like device. It looks like something out of the Middle Ages in the cockpit. In the unlikely event that the plane does crash and the pilot survives, or the co-pilot, somebody survives in the cockpit, it's to cut your way out of the plane because it's an aluminum can. You just need to, all you need is scissors and you can cut your way out. Like, don't press too hard on that side anymore. You know, how you fall asleep, you leaning on that thing. You sure that's a good idea? So, one of the things that also comes up is that none of this was all staged by the United States. And in fact, what we did was we emptied out the passengers from the airplanes and flew empty planes in. The whole thing was staged. There was even talk of an Israeli conspiracy, that maybe the Israelis were somehow involved. And the rumor was there were no Jews in the Twin Tower. Why weren't there any Jews in the Twin Tower? So automatically we were in like anti-Semitism, protocols of the elders of Zion land, because that had to happen early on. And in fact, there was a little bitty kernel of truth in the story that got expanded upon, and it's this. The Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, and for that matter, the Egyptian intelligence, had warned us the week before there was an attack imminent coming the next week. And then people took that warning that came from two of our, they're not officially allies, right? We've never signed a treaty of alliance with either state, but they're definitely friends. And you know, we didn't take the warning seriously. That's the only story. There's no Jewish conspiracy to kill Americans or something. But that's where our mind started going. And then there was this basic general feeling that this was an inside job. There were explosives put in the Twin Towers. And it wasn't the planes that took down the Twin Towers. Explosives were detonated to bring the Twin Towers down. And there was apparently a newspaper article in New Zealand that said that the Twin Towers came down before they came down. And people were like, oh, what's going on? And right, it's like these layers and all these conspiracy theories start to run. And there were bumper stickers everywhere. 9/11 was an inside job. And Alex Jones took off with it. And he's like talking about how it's very clear that there was an inside job and contrails are making people sick. And there are these aliens who are lizard folk who have taken over the United States government where they worship Satan and they eat children. And it was insane. It was insane. It was crazy land. Now, part of it was just plain old-fashioned racism. Americans, there was a group of Americans who couldn't put it into their head that 19 Arabs had hurt us so badly. It just seemed weird that these subhumans that we slaughter wholesale, we're killing them by the hundreds of thousands per year, could get us back in an act of vengeance like that. I mean, think about it. The small number for what we did in Iraq, the conservative number, from 1990 when we first implemented the sanctions to 2011 when we withdrew before we went back in 2014. So we're just doing that 21 years, 90 to 2011. The small number is 2.5 million Iraqis. The big number is 3.9 million. Let's do the small number. We don't have to do the big number. The small number is already a catastrophe, right? Hitler killed 5.1 to 5.4 million Jews, 2.5 million Iraqis. We're halfway there. It's the same ballpark now. Playing a similar game, it doesn't need to be an exaggeration in case 3.9 is the exaggeration number. That's a 9/11 every 10 days for 21 years. That's a 9/11 every 10 days for 21 years. And that's not taking into consideration all the refugees we created. That's not taking into consideration all the orphans we created. That's not taking into consideration all the infrastructure that was destroyed. The businesses that were shut down, the catastrophe that the economy went through. So, there's this weird thing, this disconnect, where there's this group of Americans who just can't accept that Arabs have done this to them. It's too much. Arabs are subhuman. They need to be exterminated or turned into refugees. How did they hurt us like this? Now, compared to what we did to them, it's nothing. It's a scratch. We did that every 10 days for 21 years to one country, a country 1/10 the size of the United States. There were like 28 million Iraqis when we attacked it. Texas is 29 million. So, country roughly the size of Texas. Those conspiracy theories just sat there and percolated, and they percolated, and they percolated. And Americans just couldn't accept, they couldn't wrap their mind around it. But then something weird happened. We re-elected Junior in 2004. But, you're gonna hate this, there's evidence of voting irregularities in 2004. In fact, there was so much voting irregularity that the following happened. The news agencies declared John Kerry the winner of the 2004 election. For 1 hour, the world thought John Kerry had won. And then the news agencies went, oops, and they revoked it, and they said, we don't know who won. And then a little while later, they went, oh, it was George Bush. Sorry. Awkward. Now, as a political scientist, I especially love this moment because we got to do a test. What does Wall Street like better, Republicans or Democrats? The reason why that was a test is on the same day we had both outcomes, so we could see what Wall Street did. When John Kerry got elected, Wall Street did have an increase, but then when they made it George Bush, the increase got higher. So Republicans are preferred by Wall Street. In case you're wondering, the super rich moneyed people like Republicans better. The reason it went up in both cases is Wall Street always likes that the election is over. I think subconsciously it's because Wall Street's always nervous that somebody will try to throw the election, and it makes them freak out. So they want to see the smooth transition of power. Something I think the average American just always assumed was a thing, but I think the elites know isn't always going to be a thing, right? Why would it be? The average American doesn't pay attention to politics, they're not engaged. Voter turnout in presidential elections is barely over 50%. It's 1/3 usually in midterms. There's no reason to think that the American public is paying enough attention to make sure that the democracy does stay intact. So why not be nervous every election? So those voting irregularities mean that in 11 states, the exit polls showed John Kerry had won, but the final result said George Bush had won. The odds of a reliable thing like exit polls being wrong in so many states at the same time is statistically probably impossible. So now George Bush has another weird, wonky election. And it's a problem for him, but the real problem he has isn't that. The real problem that he has is he was just a moron. He was awful. Every policy he tried to implement failed. He was corrupt. Every time anything happened, it was on 60 Minutes. There was one scandal on 60 Minutes after the other. I don't think any president has had so many scandals in an 8-year span of time. There was scandal on top of scandal on top of scandal on top of scandal. In addition to that, he also had the problem of 2 botched elections. Right? Usually you just have one. Well, Nixon did 2 too, so I guess there's that. So he's like Nixon that way. So 2 botched elections. The economy tanks in the last year he's president. The Great Depression was a regime-ending event. The Republicans had dominated American politics for 72 years when the economy tanked in 1932. From 1860 to 1932, the Republicans owned the United States. From 1932 until 1980, the Democrats owned the United States. Because when the economy tanked, we lost faith in the Republicans and we switched parties. Well, when the economy tanked in 2008, that was the same size, right? We were facing another depression. The only thing that stopped the depression was all the money that the federal government injected. We had a depression. It was officially a depression. We never called it that because we're in doublethink land. We called it the Great Recession. The Great Recession is a recession is a temporary setback that's actually not necessarily that bad for the economy. It's just a little painful for the average person. So, if you think of the economy going up, a recession is like a little dip. A depression is a catastrophic dip that lasts for years. It's the equivalent, calling it the Great Recession is the equivalent of you go into the emergency room because your arm just got cut off. And the doctor goes, that's a pretty big scratch. And you go, my arm was severed. It's not a scratch. And the doctor goes, I'm going to call it the Great Abrasion. That's the Great Abrasion. In any case, he also tried to curtail our rights. The USA Patriot Act crippled the 4th and 5th Amendments. The USA Patriot Act is as unconstitutional as unconstitutional can get. The Supreme Court has ruled on it, but we all know that's garbage. And the Supreme Court ruled that in the event we're facing a crisis of security, it's okay to trash our rights. I object. What's the point in having a Bill of Rights if in a crisis they don't apply? That's the only time you need the Bill of Rights is in a crisis. Because otherwise the government's going to leave you alone. It doesn't care. Well, the last time somebody tried to trash our rights, it was John Adams. And of course, the rights he was trying to trash were the First Amendment rights of press and assembly and speech. But that was a regime-ending event too, because the result of that was the Democratic Republicans took over and the Federalist Party imploded and ceased to exist. In other words, George Bush Jr. was such a genius. He had all the crises of previous presidents. He had Nixon's election crises. He had Hoover's economic crises. He had Adams's trample the Constitution crises. He had all these corruption scandals like U.S. Grant did. He was amazing. No president has managed to fit so many crises into an 8-year span of time. And I'm not done yet. He actually turned a hurricane into a disaster. Katrina. We knew Katrina was going to hit New Orleans. We did. We knew it was going to hit it. 100%. Every model showed it was going to hit New Orleans. We had 2 weeks to prepare. 1 week before it hit Florida, and then it hit Florida, and then it crossed Florida, and it went straight to New Orleans, just like everything said. There's a Category 4 hurricane heading to New Orleans. Everybody who knew anything about New Orleans knew Category 2 or more, probably the end of the city. The city was not designed to survive a Category 5 hurricane. It's below sea level, for one thing. You gotta ask the people who did that a question. Wait, you put this city below sea level? That seemed like a good idea at the time. In a hurricane-filled Gulf of Mexico. Well, he did nothing for those 2 weeks. He wasted the 2 weeks. The hurricane missed, by the way. Katrina did not hit New Orleans. It hit Mississippi and Alabama. He got lucky. At the last minute, the hurricane powered down to Category 3 and turned hard right and smacked into Mississippi and Alabama. The news initially said, oh, whew, dodged a bullet. Woo! New Orleans was in big trouble. The levees broke. The Mississippi flooded from Katrina, and the city drowned. Oops. Sorry about that. Yeah, the hurricane missed, but it's still a catastrophe. Oh well. It's a black city. It's okay. Who's the terrible English comedian who's not funny at all? Mike something. Anyway, you've forgotten him, thank God, let it go, don't look him up. They're standing there next to each other, they're trying to do some kind of New Orleans fundraiser on TV, and Kanye says, George Bush Jr. hates black people, right there, live on TV. Mike Myers, and Mike Myers is like, no? Yeah, it's before the Confederate flag, I'm sure. Yeah. George Bush is this catastrophe. Every level, 2 botched wars, because by 2008 we know we're losing both Iraq and Afghanistan, right? It's like the writing is beyond on the wall. It's a disaster. So that looks like, the Vietnam War for both LBJ and Nixon. Like, how do you fit so many disasters in one presidency? He did it. He truly was remarkable. By 2006, the American public was done with that guy. We were finished. We handed both houses of Congress to the Democrats. In 2008, we didn't just hand the presidency to the Democrats. We didn't just keep both houses with the Democrats. We gave Obama a filibuster-proof Senate. He had 60 senators. It's amazing. We were so done with George Bush Jr. that William F. Buckley's son showed up at the DNC and endorsed Obama. William F. Buckley, like the conservative who brought conservatism back when it wasn't popular in the 60s and the 70s. His son betrayed his own movement, and by the way, got thrown off of William F. Buckley's newspaper, right? Because they were like, get out, you're not a real conservative anymore. You know who else showed up at the DNC? Dwight David Eisenhower's granddaughter. She got up in front of everybody and she said, it's not that I've become a Democrat, I'll never be a Democrat. It's that the Republican Party has moved away from me, I've lost my party. I can't relate to it anymore, so I'm here to endorse Barack Obama. You know who else showed up at the DNC in 2008 in Denver, Colorado? Nancy and Ronald Reagan. Of course, not the president, because he's dead. It's Ronald Reagan Jr., his son. Ronald Reagan Jr. and Nancy Reagan walk on to the stage at the Democratic National Convention. They didn't endorse Obama, to be clear. They held back. They were there. That was an endorsement. Just showing up was an endorsement. They officially only talked about stem cell research. That was the only thing they were there to talk about. But in reality, they were at the DNC. So, in the middle of all of this, we elect a black man. And it triggers the same exact conspiracy theory mechanism that 9/11 did. But it's on top of 9/11. It's compounded on 9/11. All of a sudden, there's all these people saying, don't raise our taxes. And the Tea Party movement is created. The Tea Party movement saying, don't raise our taxes is amazing because Obama's tax cuts that he was implementing were going to cut more taxes for the average white person than John McCain's tax cut had he been elected. In other words, they're saying don't raise our taxes, and here it is, the president is going to lower their taxes more than the other guy. Now, to compensate for the fact that Obama was lowering taxes for the bottom 98%, the scum, the meddlesome and troublesome outsiders of the United States, the 308 million of the 311 million of us, that odious, terrible, disgusting portion of the population, he was going to raise taxes on the top 2% to offset the tax cuts for the bottom. And so because the average everyday white person was out there protesting because they wanted Obama not to raise their taxes, the Republicans then used that to force Obama to delete the tax hike on the top 2% in Congress to get it passed. Isn't that crazy? And then the birther movement kicked in. And they went hand in hand, the birther movement and the Tea Party movement. The birther movement said Obama wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Indonesia. Or maybe he was born in Kenya. They weren't really sure. Definitely not in the United States. Now, according to Obama, he was born in Hawaii. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter. The Constitution doesn't say anything about where you were born. It says the status of your birth. It says natural born citizen. It doesn't say natural born citizen in the United States. It just says natural born citizen. Meaning, I could be born on Mars. As long as one or both of my parents is a US citizen and my birth is reported in I don't know what the time period is, so I don't want to give you a time period. I think it's less than 2 weeks. So don't wait. Do it quickly. And then you don't have to be naturalized because now you are a natural born citizen. Like John McCain, the guy Obama ran against, who was born in Panama. You want me to say that again? So the birther movement is angry because Obama wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Hawaii. But it doesn't matter where he was born. But the guy that he ran against wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Panama. They voted for that guy and didn't have a problem voting for that guy. In other words, where Obama was born was a dog whistle for a black man can't be president of the United States. And now a whole new set of conspiracy theories kick into full gear. And who's at the front of that? Donald J. Trump. He was one of the original birthers. And this movement takes off, and it will haunt Obama the whole presidency. And within 2 years, we are voting for the Republicans. They'll sweep and take the House and the Senate. They take the House, not the Senate, in 2010. They don't get the Senate until 2014 election. And so Obama's last 2 years, he didn't have either House of Congress. And that reaction, this pendulum swing thing that we did, was so weird that in 2016, one of the conspiracy theories that Democrats had running was that in 2016, the people who had voted for Bernie in the primaries voted for Trump in the November election. So it was the Sanders people who had cost the Democrats the election. That was one of the, it's not true statistically. There were people who voted for Bernie, who voted for Trump, but it wasn't a big population of people. It was like 3% or something ridiculous like that. Like, you can ignore that. It didn't swing the election. What happened was, that what I find interesting, is more people who had voted for Obama in 2008 voted for Trump in 2016. Isn't that interesting? In other words, as part of this pendulum swing, there were all these people who had remorse for having voted for the black president, who swung over to vote now for the racist president. Because Trump was the product of collective madness that had kicked in the aftermath of 9/11. But the cracks were already there because we had already had these other weird events. So we've talked about some in previous lectures, but we talked about some tonight, and that included things like what almost happened in 3 Mile Island, because when the truth finally came out and we realized we had been lied to about the severity, that this thing almost destroyed New York City, and at no point was anybody telling us that, and they never did a general evacuation. Right? It was like, wow, how is this happening? Where is this coming from? And then they might be possibly rigging elections. There was evidence of election rigging in 2002 as well. There was no evidence of election rigging in 2006, in 2010, 2008, 2012, 2014. Like, we went clean for a while. And then 2016 happened. Before 2016 happened, something else happened. Jade Helm 15. The United States Army was going to do a military maneuver right here in Texas. A group of Russians decided they were going to mess with the conspiracy theory-minded Texans. And the way they did this was they began planting stories online and social media that the reason why Jade Helm 15 was taking place, the reason why Obama was sending the United States Army to do military maneuvers in Texas was because he secretly had a plan to take over Texas sovereignty. And this began circulating. Now, I don't know if you know this, but we lost sovereignty twice. We lost it in 1845 when we signed the treaty to join the United States. We voluntarily surrendered our sovereignty to the United States. And then we lost it again 20 years later when we lost the Civil War and the Confederacy surrendered. So 1865, 2015, right? That's a long time to have not been a sovereign state, to be worried about you're going to lose your sovereignty. So the Russians who were doing this must have been thinking, man, only the wackos are going to get caught up in this. Greg Abbott ordered the Texas Guard to begin following the United States Army around. In the event the United States Army tried to end Texas sovereignty, the Texas Guard was going to intervene somehow. Does he not know about our aircraft carriers and nukes? Like, what was that going to look like? A group of guys with assault rifles taking on the United States military? What is that? And that's what he did. He had the Guard follow the army. And the Russians went, what the heck? How is this possible? We got the governor of Texas to believe the conspiracy theories? We spent like $1 million trying to feed their social media sites on a lark. We were just screwing with them. And then they go, oh my God, do you think we can throw the election? They had a guy. His name was Paul Manafort. He was Viktor Yanukovych. He was Viktor Yanukovych's campaign manager. Viktor Yanukovych was the Russian agent who ran for president of Ukraine and won twice. The first time that the cheating was so bad, they had to redo the election. The second time, he took back all his campaign promises. The people went into an uprising. They did the Maidan Square uprising, and they overthrew it. The first time it was the Orange Movement. The second time it was the Maidan Square uprising. Paul Manafort now is out of a job. Because that was 2014 when they took out Viktor Yanukovych. So Putin sent him to the United States to take over Donald Trump's campaign, to try to see if they could spend $70 million taking this American conspiracy theorist mind and twisting it into such a knot that they could throw the election. Best $70 million anybody's ever spent in human history. Can you imagine? It's chunk change. ACC just passed a $770 million bond to upgrade the campuses. The Russians spent $70 million to tamper with the 2016 election. And it's because we were open for it. We were vulnerable because we had become so crazed from 9/11. We still haven't resolved 9/11 in our minds. And we become so crazed from the idea that a black man had somehow become president. We lost our collective minds. And it didn't help any that Reagan started cutting public school education funding in the 80s, right? Because think about it, 80s, 20s, they're 40. Oh my God. They didn't get a good public school education because their funding was cut. For those of you who don't know what QAnon is, totally go look it up. It is fantastic. The layers are amazing. It's really complicated. And what's also really cool about it is it looks just like a cult. So QAnon will make these amazing predictions and then they don't come true. Well, that's the type of cognitive dissonance that you have to do when you're part of a cult, because the cult leader will prophesy and tell you what's going to happen. Aliens are going to come pick us up in 3 weeks. Get ready. Sell all your belongings. Give me the money. And then when the aliens come, you'll be ready to go. and then the aliens don't come in 3 weeks, and you go, well, I had a conversation with them and they weren't ready to pick you up, you kick into cognitive dissonance at this point, because you know it's a scam. It has to be a scam. The problem is, you sold your house and gave it to the scam artist. So you have two choices. You're a dupe, or it's real. And it's real is a lot easier to believe in because you've already invested so much. Because it's hard to imagine that you're such a big dupe. You sold your house in Austin, by the way. It's like $650,000. You paid $150,000 for it. And so, you know, a huge chunk of equity, and you gave it all to this guy. Isn't that crazy? You just need to know that we got to this place because there was a series of political decisions made by people who don't care about you and are willing to kill you to make a profit. And until you start holding them accountable by doing things like voting them out of office or protesting, they're going to keep doing this to you. Go on strike. Do something. But be politically engaged. Write letters to the editor. Write letters to your Congress people. Write letters to the state legislature. Vote. Be engaged and read books. Books are really useful. Don't stay away from conspiracy theory sites and stop using social media for your news. And if you see news that's interesting on social media, double check it. 9 times out of 10, it's a lie. And just remember that. It's entertainment. It's not information most of the time. I have posted stuff and regretted it later because then I realized, oh my God, I can't believe I got duped by this. We all do it. It's okay. Just don't do it. Fix it. Delete the post. Apologize for the post. Go, what was I thinking? And then move on. Anyway, I'm done. We're done. I think we're done. I hope we're done because I'm done. I probably forgot something. We'll do a part 5 later when I remember. I'll be driving home. I'll be like, oh God. All right. Thanks so much. I'm going to use the stairs this time. It's high tech.
The point is that you have to work. And that's why the propaganda system is so successful. Very few people are going to have the time or the energy or the commitment to carry out the constant battle that's required to get outside of, McNeil Lehrer or Dan Rather or somebody like that. The easy thing to do, you come home from work, you're tired, you've had a busy day, you're not going to spend the evening carrying out a research project. So you turn on the tube, you say it's probably right, or you look at the headlines in the paper and then you watch the sports or something. And that's basically the way the system of indoctrination works. Sure, the other stuff is there, but you're going to have to work to find it. Modern industrial civilization has developed within a certain system of convenient myths. The driving force of modern industrial civilization has been individual material gain, which is accepted as legitimate, even praiseworthy, on the grounds that private vices yield public benefits in the classic formulation. Now, it's long been understood very well that a society that is based on this principle will destroy itself in time. It can only persist with whatever suffering and injustice it entails, as long as it's possible to pretend that the destructive forces that humans create are limited, that the world is an infinite resource, and that the world is an infinite garbage can. At this stage of history, either one of two things is possible. Either the general population will take control of its own destiny and will concern itself with community interests, guided by values of solidarity and sympathy and concern for others, or alternatively, there will be no destiny for anyone to control. As long as some specialized class is in a position of authority, it is going to set policy in the special interests that it serves. But the conditions of survival, let alone justice, require rational social planning in the interests of the community as a whole, and by now that means the global community. The question is whether privileged elites should dominate mass communication and should use this power as they tell us they must, namely to impose necessary illusions, to manipulate and deceive the stupid majority and remove them from the public arena. The question in brief is whether democracy and freedom are values to be preserved or threats to be avoided. In this possibly terminal phase of human existence, democracy and freedom are more than values to be treasured. They may well be essential to survival.